You are listening to the Soulful Notes, and this episode is presented to you in the form of an audiobook. There's something we don't talk about enough in the world of personal development. We spend so much time focusing on the internal, on discipline, on mindset, on building better habits, on pushing through resistance, and doing the work, that we start to believe that progress is something we can manufacture alone. That if we just stay focused, if we just do everything right, the results will come. But at some point, for a lot of people, that logic just stops working. Because you can have the perfect routine. You can be the most disciplined person in the room. You can be learning constantly, executing consistently, doing everything you're supposed to do, and still feel like nothing is moving. You're growing, but no one's noticing. You're trying, but the doors aren't opening. You're building, but somehow you're still invisible. And that's where the frustration starts to build. Because when you're doing everything right and still feel stuck, still feel behind, still feel like you're running in place, what else is left to fix? And what the book Never Eat Alone reveals in a way that's both simple and unsettling is that the thing you're missing might not be a skill or a system or even self-belief. It just might be other people, not in a transactional way, not in a "who can help me climb the ladder" kind of way, but in the foundational sense, in the way that connection and generosity and shared momentum are actually the invisible architecture behind almost every meaningful breakthrough. This book isn't about networking in the way we usually imagine it. It's not about schmoozing or handing out business cards or turning yourself into someone you're not just to get noticed. This book is about real connection. It's about building a life where your relationships aren't a side project but the engine that helps you move forward. And when you start to see that clearly, everything changes. Because you stop trying to do it all alone. You stop viewing connection as a bonus. You stop isolating as a form of self-discipline. And instead you start to understand that behind every opportunity, every leap, every turning point you admire in someone else's story, there was a relationship that made it possible. So today, we're going to slow down, take a breath, and talk about the core lessons from the book Never Eat Alone. Not as a how-to guide for making small talk, but as a deeper invitation to rewire how you think about people, success, and what it actually means to build something meaningful. Because you can be the smartest person in the room, the hardest working, the most committed, and still stay stuck if you try to do it all by yourself. Let's explore why. One of the biggest reasons people struggle to build the kinds of relationships that move their lives forward isn't because they don't understand the value of connection. It's because somewhere along the way they internalize the belief that reaching out is a kind of weakness. There's this quiet fear that if you initiate, if you send the first message or ask someone for their time or try to build a connection, it will somehow come off as desperate, that people will assume you're looking for something, that they'll judge you for needing help, or worse, for trying to use them. And because we don't want to seem opportunistic, we default to the opposite. We stay quiet. We tell ourselves we'll earn the right to reach out once we've proven ourselves. That if we just keep our head down, work hard enough, improve enough, get good enough, eventually someone will notice. But the truth, as author Keith Ferrazzi makes very clear in Never Eat Alone, is that this kind of thinking doesn't actually serve us. In fact, it quietly isolates us from the very people who could help us grow. Because no matter how good you are at what you do, no matter how driven or disciplined or talented you may be, your ability to move forward in life will always be connected to your ability to collaborate, your ability to build trust, and to be seen, and more often than not, that begins with a simple willingness to initiate. Ferrazzi explains that no one gets there alone, and the people who look like they did, you just didn't see who helped them. You didn't see the introductions, the mentors, the early supporters who opened doors before anyone else believed in them. And what that means is waiting until you need help is already too late. You don't build real relationships at the moment of crisis. You build them slowly over time through consistent generosity, through showing up when there's nothing to gain, through reaching out not because you want something, but because you want to build something. And that mindset changes everything. Because the moment you stop seeing connection as a transaction and start seeing it as a long-term investment in mutual growth, all that pressure to impress and be someone you're not, it starts to dissolve. You're not networking, you're not pitching, you're not forcing anything. You're just starting something, a small conversation, a shared interest, a tiny moment of realness in a world that's usually too busy or too guarded to notice. And yes, it might feel awkward at first. You might feel like you're bothering people or that you're not important enough to be reaching out. But what you'll find, especially when you come in with honesty, curiosity, and a desire to contribute, is that most people aren't nearly as closed off as you think. They're just waiting for someone to go first. One of the most powerful ideas from the book is that relationships aren't built on what you can extract. They're built on what you're willing to give. And for a lot of people, especially those who've been conditioned to associate success with independence, that's a hard mindset to wrap your head around at first. Because we've been taught to hold our cards close, to keep our ideas private, to wait until we're in a position of leverage before we offer anything to anyone else. We want to make sure that we're not taken advantage of. We want to wait until we have something impressive to show before we offer help, advice, or access. But Ferrazzi explains that generosity isn't what you do after you've made it. It's how you get there. It's not a reward for success. It's the path to success. Because the truth is, the people who become trusted, the people who become magnetic, the people who others want to help and collaborate with and root for, those people are rarely the ones who hoard what they know or protect what they've built. They're the ones who give freely, who share ideas before they're perfect, who make introductions without expecting anything in return, who offer what they can even when they don't have much. And that generosity compounds over time. You might help someone today who doesn't return the favor. That's fine. You might share a resource or promote someone's work and get nothing back. That's fine too. But over time, when you're known as someone who adds value without strings, people remember, people talk, and people show up when it matters. And what's interesting is that generosity doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to mean money or connections or a huge following. Sometimes it's just sharing a helpful article. Sometimes it's being the first person to comment on someone's project. Sometimes it's introducing two people you think would really enjoy working together. The point is, you don't need leverage to be valuable. You just need to pay attention to what people care about. You need to listen. You need to care enough to take a small step on someone else's behalf, even when there's nothing in it for you right now. And when you do that, When you make generosity a habit, not a tactic, something subtle shifts in your relationships. People stop seeing you as someone who's trying to network and start seeing you as someone they trust. Someone they want in the room, not because you've earned it with prestige, but because you've proven it with presence. And that kind of presence is rare, but it's also something you can build, not by trying to impress, but by offering something real, consistently, quietly, and without keeping score. One of the most damaging myths in personal development, especially for people who identify as introverted, humble, or even just private, is the idea that if you work hard enough, people will find you. That if you're good at what you do, someone will notice. That if you keep improving, someone will eventually reward you. That if you keep your head down, the right people will somehow appear at the right time and say, "Hey, we've been watching. You're ready." But the hard truth is that rarely happens. Not because your work isn't good enough, not because you're not worthy, but simply because people are busy. And no one is coming to discover you if you haven't made yourself discoverable. And this is one of the core ideas from the book that hits hardest when you're ready to hear it. Visibility is your responsibility, and staying hidden isn't a sign of humility. It's a form of self-sabotage. Now, that doesn't mean you have to constantly promote yourself. It doesn't mean you need to turn into some hyper-curated personal brand or become a master of social media. What it means is that you have to take ownership of how you show up. That might mean sharing your work more often, even when it's not perfect. It might mean speaking up in a room where you usually stay silent. It might mean inviting someone to coffee just to talk about ideas. It might mean following up, sending the email, offering your thoughts, showing up when it would be easier to stay home. And yes, it's vulnerable. Putting yourself out there always carries risk. You might feel ignored. You might feel awkward. You might feel like no one is listening. But over time, those moments of visibility start to add up. Not because you're trying to get attention, but because you're willing to be seen. And when you're willing to be seen, people start to respond. Hey, remember your name. They associate you with momentum. They think of you when opportunities arise. Because here's the thing no one tells you. People don't help the most deserving person. They help the person they remember. The person they feel connected to. The person who shows up in the right places not by accident but by intention. So if you've been sitting back waiting for recognition, waiting for someone to discover your value, this is your invitation to stop waiting. You don't need to wait until you're the best in the room. You just need to let people know you're in the room. And that kind of visibility is all about courage. Additionally, a lot of people talk about networking as if it's something you do occasionally. Like a task you check off when you need a new job or when you're launching something or when things aren't going well and you realize you might need help. But what this book teaches over and over is that relationships don't work like that. They don't grow in bursts. They grow like anything else that's alive, slowly, quietly, and with consistent care. One of the reasons people burn out on building relationships is because at some point they start counting. They start measuring. They start noticing who called them back and who didn't. Who said thank you and who didn't. Who returned the favor and who never followed up. And it's understandable. When you're generous, when you try to support others, when you put effort into showing up for people, it's natural to want that effort to come back around, to want some sense that it mattered. But what Ferrazzi argues And what a lot of people figure out the hard way is that the moment you start keeping score, you change the nature of the relationship. Because now the generosity isn't really generosity anymore. It's a quiet transaction, and when the return doesn't come fast enough, the resentment starts to build. But if you're in this for the long game, if what you actually want is real trust, real connection, a real network that grows with you and carries you forward, then you have to let go of the scoreboard. Because relationships work more like planting seeds. You don't know which ones will take root. You don't know how long they'll take to grow. You don't know which ones will come back years later in ways you never expected. And if you stop too soon, if you give up because you didn't get what you thought you'd get, you miss the whole point. If there's one thing to take from Never Eat Alone, it's this: success doesn't happen in a vacuum. You don't have to do it all alone. You're not supposed to. And if you've spent years trying to win by outworking, outperforming, or outlasting everyone else, maybe now's the time to try something different. You just have to be someone worth remembering. And that starts by making connection a practice, not a strategy. Not a phase, not a tactic, but something real. So reach out, check in, offer something small, and see what happens. Not because you need something, but because this is how things grow. I hope this was helpful in some way. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Soulful Notes.